Welcome to the EchoJunction podcast.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for episode number 100 of the EchoJunction podcast. We're talking social and digital. My name is Adam Fraser. I'm the founder of EchoJunction. And if you're interested in the strategic landscape of social media, digital marketing, and marketing technology, this is very much the podcast for you. A very special guest for a very special milestone episode. I am delighted to welcome back the one, the only Jay Baer to the EchoJunction podcast. Been lucky enough to have Jay on this podcast twice before, way back in episode 2 when we talked about the social media landscape. And just over a year ago, we talked about Jay's most recent book, Hug Your Haters on Social Customer Service. So Jay and I take a step back and look at trends in the social media landscape in the couple of years since he was first on the podcast. There's really no one better in the market to talk about these things with, one of the true thought leaders in the digital marketing space, and an absolute honor to have Jay back on the podcast. So thank you so much for your ongoing support of this podcast. Delighted to reach milestone episode number 100. Hope you enjoy the chat with Jay, and I will check in with you at the end. I'm delighted to welcome back to the EchoJunction podcast, Jay Baer. Jay Baer is founder of Convince and Convert, a New York Times bestselling author, keynote speaker, and general grand fromage in the world of digital marketing. Jay, a huge welcome back.
I am delighted to be back. You couldn't keep me away, and here I am again.
Are you a grand fromage or a grand poubert? Happy with either?
I think I like grand fromage. I'm going to go with that, I think. I like that. And I don't even know if that's true, but I appreciate it.
Now, look, wonderful to have you back on. I will link up in the show notes our 2 previous chats.
Yes.
Gonna freak you out and tell you it was almost 2 years ago that a wet behind the ears podcaster in Australia pinged you, and we did episode number 2 of the EchoJunction podcast. And then just over a year ago, we did the Hug Your Haters world exclusive, which was wonderful. And here we are now with the millennial episode number 100.
Wow, I didn't realize this was episode 100. Congratulations, first of all. It is not easy to get to episode 100, and most podcasts never get there. So that is quite an accomplishment, my friend. Congratulations, and I am more than honored to be episode 100.
No, and look, just publicly, thank you once again for taking the plunge and really helping me kickstart it way back when with episode 2. I don't underestimate the value that had in terms of subsequent guests sort of browsing who'd been on before, and it was a great help. So thank you very much. So look, Jay, I thought actually it was opportune. I dug out what we talked about 2 years ago, and we had a sort of general meander through the social media landscape. I thought it'd be interesting to do that again and really sort of focus on, we all talk about the pace of change and how fast things move, but things really have moved on a great deal in the last 2 years. So let's start with one theme that maybe we tend to not talk about too much anymore, the world of organic reach. Maybe just paint the picture, if you could, Jay, for listeners, some may be newer to the sector, on a 5-year view, how organic reach began. People may not remember the days when you put something on Facebook and your audience actually largely saw it.
Yeah, they saw it.
And I guess sort of, ReachGate, which was around 2 years ago, where things are at now. Maybe paint the picture for us.
So initially, Facebook and Twitter, which were really, for the most part, at least in the Western world, were the only games in town, when you created content and published it, the people who had signed up as your fans or followers would largely see it. It functioned quite similar to how email functions, right? So if you have somebody on your email list and you send them an email, they're going to get the email. Now they may choose to not open it, they may delete it, they may not click on it, but it will show up, right? It's like if I send you a letter in the post, you're going to get it. When you open the box, it's there. And so that's how social media worked, at least initially, for businesses and for brands. But then a couple of things happened. One, Facebook and Twitter decided, hey, we need to actually make money at this. And they also got to the point where, because so much content was being created and published on a minute-by-minute basis, that there was no practical mathematical way to show everybody everything that they were quote unquote due. So Facebook once mentioned, Facebook senior executive once mentioned probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, that on average, and I'm sure this number is much higher now, but at the time, on average, each time somebody logged into Facebook, they were due approximately 1,500 pieces of content, meaning that of the brands that you follow, the people that you're friends with, et cetera, if you add all of those people up and all the brands up, 1,500 pieces of content should show up in your news feed because you have liked that person or liked that brand, etc. Now, it is, of course, impractical to create a stream of 1,500 pieces of content. And so that's when Facebook and Twitter eventually copied it, said, well, there's no way we can show you everything. So what should we show you? And they decided, and they've tweaked this formula many, many times, but they decided to show you things that they believe you will like best, based partially on what you've liked in the past and partially based on the behavior of other people who you are similar to. And so all that means is that today, the rich get richer. If you produce good content in social media, you will get some measure of free distribution. But in large measure, if you do not publish things that are disproportionately good, very few, if any, people will see it. Now, businesses and brands have complained about that for a long time, but you don't get to send free email either, right? You have to pay your email service provider every time you send an email. And so for a long time, people got to get free exposure in social, and now it's not free because in many cases, to reach the audience that you want to reach, you have to pay Facebook, Twitter, and now Instagram and others for advertising to ensure that your audience actually sees your messages. And because now, in many ways, social media has gone from free to paid, the skills necessary to be good at social media and the budgets necessary to be effective at social media have changed quite significantly since episode 2 of this fine podcast.
Absolutely. A number of things I want to unpack in that, Jay, but just first as a guide, I remember in the period post Facebook Reachgate, which again was about 2 years ago, the first major algorithm change when people started, screaming from the rooftops about how unfair it all was. In the period after that, there was sort of rough metrics that now on average, 1 to 5% of your audience on Facebook might see an organic post. I know it can wildly fluctuate, but do you have any insight based on the brands you work with on where organic reach is at now?
Well, from a percentage basis, on average, you're looking at 0.5%.
Wow. So it's continued the decline. And look, LinkedIn, I don't know, the maths has become so congested and so choked. No doubt the algorithm is alive and well there as well. I guess.
Absolutely. They just don't talk about it as much. And with the new, I don't know if you've gotten the new LinkedIn yet. I think they're trying to fix that a little bit, partially by pushing most people to paid, right? They really want people to sign up for the Sales Navigator product, which cleans up some of that nonsense. And so even LinkedIn is no longer going to be free in the classic sense for power users and for brands.
No, correct. And look, no doubt, as Snapchat stories get more congested, the same story will play out there as it did in Instagram and elsewhere. So I guess, Jay, and again, at the strategic level, in that 2-year period, and certainly the 12 months after that podcast, people begrudgingly sort of threw the towel in. You hear it all the time, social's pay to play now. It's all about paid media. Two sort of separate sort of follow-on questions from that. Does that sadden you? And I don't mean in a sort of romantic sense about, business should be a certain way. Just, do you feel that if we just jump to the end conclusion, social is just another broadcast channel in essence, and we just pump out ads, we're missing the two-way nature of social media? And I guess secondly, have we completely lost that sort of community building a community flavor that social had, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago?
I think yes and no. It's certainly different. Most social does not have that same kind of community management vibe that it had a few years ago. But there's no doubt that excellent organic content can still succeed. My friend Scott Stratton, terrific author and speaker and marketing consultant, a grand fromage, put a small video clip on Facebook last week. And it was a 1 minute and 57-second excerpt from one of his keynote speeches about how old people think when they hear the word millennial. Now, he did not boost that post. He didn't pay for that post. He didn't run an ad. He just took a 1 minute and 57-second video clip of his own speech, put it on his own Facebook page. And as of this afternoon, he has 11 million views of that clip. Wow. So great content succeeds, mediocre content fails without paid exposure, and Facebook unapologetically says, well, of course it should be like that. Great content should be rewarded with free exposure, and mediocre content should be punished by not getting free exposure. And it's actually, even though it's frustrating for business, it's really hard to argue with that philosophically, isn't it?
Yeah, cream rises to the top. So you're almost saying, Jay, is the end game strategy, you still use organic reach almost as the testing ground. However limited the sort of sample size is, you will get a feel for how good the content is going, and then throw the paid sort of support behind that.
I think that's a strategy that we tend to employ at Convince and Convert, and certainly something we work with many of our corporate clients on is try and create the best possible organic content. And then when you have organic content that is disproportionately successful to what your baseline is, then you add fuel to that fire and expand the reach with paid, because the converse doesn't really work. Gary Vaynerchuk said this really well a couple of weeks ago. He did a video and he said, look, no amount of advertising makes up for shitty content. Like you can't spend your way out of this. You can get more reach, you can show it to more people, but if it doesn't move anybody, if they don't want to like, share, comment, and shout about it, what have you actually accomplished other than showing somebody something that they don't really care about?
Okay, so we sort of ended up in we're not quite in the sitting around kumbaya, singing songs around the fireplace, touchy-feely space maybe we were 5 years ago.
The reality is this is becoming more about media and less about social. And is that a desired outcome? Well, as a human being, I would say no. As a business person, I say I play by the rules of the game at the time that the game is played. I don't like it any better than anybody else, but my job is to figure out how to make this work, whatever the rules happen to be. And this is kind of where we find ourselves, at least at this point.
So, Jay, final sort of question on this sub-theme. I'll look at the skills required to be a good social media marketer. And again, in contrast with a few years ago, are we almost more now in the media buying, Google SEO, tweak a headline, look at the click-through rates, almost the science of it, beyond where maybe the artistic side where we began?
Well, I don't know that we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's certainly a role to be played for creativity and artistry and humanity in social media, but for quite a while, that was the whole game. I mean, most social media managers and social media practitioners were originally hired because they were good writers, or because they were particularly good at humanization, or good at connecting with people using a brand's principles as kind of their raw materials. Now, of course, you do need to have some measure of capabilities on testing and analytics and optimization and paid media, and even things like video, right? We talked to a client about this recently. Like, hey, do you need in-house video editing? Well, that wasn't a thing that you would have needed necessarily a couple of years ago. So there's no question that the range of skills necessary have expanded, and the type of skills necessary have changed. And in fact, I just predicted this in a blog post that's published tomorrow. I really see in the next 18 to 24 months, more and more companies taking their social media activities out of house and giving them to agencies, because it's just gotten so complex and continues to change all the time that companies are saying, you know what, I don't know if we want to get in the middle of this. It's getting too crazy and too expensive. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Interesting to see how that trend pans out. So, Jay, just want to shift gears a little bit and dip our toe into the content marketing bath. We could devote a whole podcast, I guess, to this topic, and we certainly talked a lot about your book, Utility, in our first podcast. But again, just looking at the sort of medium-term trends, and, content marketing was certainly, people said it's this new thing, it's 100 plus years old, but, it was certainly flavor of the month in 2014, 2015, 2016. I guess really interested in your views, having written Utility, having written Hug Your Haters, a book entirely about social customer service, that sort of continuum between, can I call it customer service, answer your customers' questions end of the continuum, right through to brands stretching themselves sort of, to me, way out of their comfort zone. Take just one example, so without picking on McDonald's, they launched a YouTube channel targeting at millennials and put lots of dollars behind it. And a year later, shut it down with 9 videos getting less than 1,000 views. And, this is McDonald's. So you can imagine, a significant budget went into the production and the promotion. aspect of that. So I guess if at one extreme we've got, hug your haters, we've got the Marcus Sherrod example with swimming pools and becoming known as the guy that just answers every question, and I'm all in on that. But the further I get, if you sort of visualize that continuum to the McDonald's example and, Pizza Express joining the debate about what the next royal baby's name should be, I really struggle with where brands go with that. What's your perspective?
Well, I think there's always a role to play for top of the funnel content that is the initial connection point between a company and its future customers. And that's when you start talking about content that isn't about them, but is of interest to their customers. Now, you can certainly play that card and go way too far afield, and in some cases that absolutely happens. But at some point, if all your content is sort of a video version of your existing brochures or only an FAQ, then you're going to run out of content to create and run out of ways to connect with your customers as well. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, that you can create content that is interesting, that is not necessarily about your products and services, that actually furthers your brand objectives. But when you start to pursue that line of thinking, you've got to be careful that you don't get so far outside the box that it no longer is relevant or resonant with anybody. Because when you start doing that, you can really waste a lot of money, as you talked about. And I guess the good news is companies waste a lot of money on a lot of other communication archetypes as well, right? They waste money on bad television and bad radio and bad outdoor and bad direct mail as well. So social media and content marketing is certainly not immune to bad decision making.
I mean, is the sort of broad rule of thumb, if you're Colgate, you can talk about teeth hygiene and mouthwash and healthy foods to eat, but don't stray into the Oscars and Miley Cyrus and pop culture? I mean, do you have any kind of guide for brands? When do they cross the line to irrelevancy and time wasting?
I'm not a huge fan personally of brands trying to sort of ride the zeitgeist and say, okay, this weekend is the Grammys, so let's try and force ourselves into that conversation, because I do feel like it's a forced connection point. But of course, there's many examples of brands doing that well and getting a short-term viral bump because they did something funny or cute on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, etc. So I'm not sure those stunts produce a lot of lasting brand value, but there's certainly examples of them working. I just feel like you're better off thinking through something that's a little bit more sustainable strategically and putting an effort into that.
Great. No, great point. Look, Jay, remaining part of the interview, let's sort of meander through the major social platforms and just talk about current performance trends, where they're going. No other place to start than the 800-pound gorilla in our sector, Facebook. I, as well as Podcasting Weekly, I try and generally successfully blog weekly as well. So once a quarter, I do a blog post on the sort of 10 key takeouts from Facebook's quarterly results. And I've got to tell you, I'm running out of adjectives and introductory paragraphs because they continue just to knock it out the park on any metric, user numbers, cash, profitability, engagement. Talk us through Facebook and its current performance.
Yeah, it is, obviously in addition to being the 800-pound gorilla of social platforms, they run a hell of a company, right? They are very, very good just as they could be selling cars and it would be remarkable what they are able to execute on. And as a Facebook shareholder since the very beginning, I'm delighted at their performance. What's fascinating is how unafraid they are to use their size, to use the kind of, enormous nature of their network to just put the squeeze on people. I mean, obviously, Instagram Stories has taken an enormous bite out of Snapchat. Just recently, a week or so ago, they announced that they're going to go hard into, at least in the U.S., into jobs and job seekers and resumes and find your job and post your job on Facebook, which of course is a direct shot across the bow on LinkedIn. Every time somebody else has a good idea, they instantly copy it and do it better and roll it out to a bigger audience because they have a bigger audience. And it's almost predatory. In fact, it probably is predatory by the definition of that word, but it certainly works for them. And I think one of the greatest accomplishments, at least to date, at Facebook is the fact that they have infiltrated the lives of almost everybody in the world who has electricity and done so in multiple different ways, and yet people don't hate them. It is quite remarkable. Anything that is a monopoly like that, and I would say they're essentially a monopoly in many ways. People always hate a monopoly. They hate the monopoly cable company. They hate the monopoly telephone company, the monopoly utility company, and the water company, and the gas company, and the postal service. But Facebook, while I wouldn't consider them to be beloved at this point, people don't feel that way about them. And to me, that is an unbelievable trick.
It's funny. You're right. And there just seems to be, I guess maybe this shows we're near the top. It's hard to see what's going to sort of derail them or allow, an upstart to disrupt them. But the one weak spot I always thought Facebook may have was sort of the trust privacy issue, the constant algorithm
changes. That's exactly what I thought too. But
yeah,
every time there's a dust up about it, it kind of goes away. People are like, whatever, I don't care that much.
Yeah, that's right. So it's hard to see what's going to stop them. And you sort of feel for the meerkats of the world when, Facebook jumps into Facebook Live and you go, right, that's the end of, numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6 in the market. You're right.
They're so smart about acquisitions too. I mean, Instagram, they paid $1 billion for Instagram and people thought that was the craziest thing ever. And now you think about what Instagram is actually worth. Same thing with WhatsApp. I mean, WhatsApp is an unbelievably important tool that we don't talk about nearly enough. And over the next 18 to 24 months is going to become even more important. Messenger, same way, which obviously is homegrown. But ultimately, and I really believe this, Facebook newsfeed, Facebook timeline, which is what we typically use, will be one of the least important products in their entire portfolio.
Wow. Yeah, they're certainly diversifying, making some bets, and be interesting. The rumored bid $3 billion for Snapchat. I mean, you could say now with an IPO coming at $20+ billion, that was the right choice not to do it. But as you equally say, Instagram Stories, Facebook Messenger, there's a lot of imitation that could clip at the heels of Snapchat going forward as well.
I think if you are a Snapchat executive or a founder, clearly it was not the right decision to sell. You're going to make more on the IPO than you would have if you'd sold to Facebook. But let's come back and revisit this on episode 200 and see where Snapchat is at that point, because I can guarantee you that Snapchat's ability to succeed long term would be a heck of a lot better as part of Facebook than as a lone wolf, because Facebook will continue to chip away and chip away and chip away and chip away at them because they view Snapchat, I wouldn't say as an existential threat, but certainly as somebody that they don't want to get a toehold. And so they will continue to snuff them out. They will continue to rob them of oxygen at every turn. And so I hope they take their money on the IPO, and I hope they invest it wisely, because I am not bullish on their future outside of the initial IPO.
I'll come back, excuse me, Jay, to Snapchat in a couple of questions. Final couple of things I want to draw out on Facebook. Jay, tell me what you're seeing. I think it was late 2014, Mark Zuckerberg in the first town hall, Q&A with staff, and it was beamed to the world. He said within 5 years, he thought Facebook would be almost exclusively video as a medium. Mm-hmm. We've also seen the launch of Live and them, investing, I think, $50 million US to encourage people to go, produce live content on video. So I guess, what are you seeing in terms of that trend? Are Facebook going all in on video? And is that how, I guess, the stream is playing out? Is it becoming increasingly video dominated?
It's interesting. I saw them talk about that, and obviously I'm familiar with their big moves in video. I create more video than I have, and probably that's true for a lot of marketing consultants and people like us. I don't see that happening amongst what I would consider to be regular Facebook users. Now, maybe it's just too early, and maybe 2 years from now, that's going to be the case. But this idea that Facebook will be almost entirely video requires that people like my wife and my mom are publishing video instead of short written status updates. And I got to tell you, brother, we're a long way away from that happening. We're a long way away from that happening. I just, I just don't see it. They just don't want to do it. I mean, maybe someday, but for business, sure. For business, absolutely. For individuals, I don't know.
It's a great point, Jay, that we can get caught in our own echo chamber and goldfish bowl as, MarTech professionals. It's important to keep an eye on what, Johnny in Iowa is doing on Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, we're not our own audience, right? And the more you can keep yourself, reminding yourself of that, the better off you'll be. Nobody who you actually know in this industry is a relevant focus group for the reality. So, good. That's why it's nice to have. It's nice, nice to be around my wife and my mom, and I got two high school, two high school teenagers at home who kind of are the opposite side, right? They can make sure that they're involved in a bunch of stuff that's well past Snapchat in terms of the exploratory stuff. So it's nice to see what they're doing too.
Sure. Look, last thing on Facebook, and I guess, Jay, very topical. We're still in the sort of months following your election. I know this has become a big topic more broadly, is fake news. And again, it's interesting to look at the longer term trend as we are that, Facebook began where we shared puppy photos and baby photos and what we had for lunch. And then suddenly I blinked and Pew Research are telling me 60% of millennials get their news from Facebook, like serious news, not, what my mates are up to. So there's that trend, I guess, of how users are now using Facebook. And we saw the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the major media companies acknowledging that by sort of having to go all in on Facebook. But then we have this fake news thing. What responsibility does Facebook, I mean, this is a big question, is Facebook a media company? Is it a tech platform? What responsibility does Facebook have to police what is being shared on its technology?
Well, I think ultimately what happens is people are going to get whatever they need: news, weather, sports, recipes, foot rubs from the place that they're spending all their time. And the average Facebook user spends an hour a day now, or some crazy amount of time on the platform. So it doesn't surprise me that Facebook has become the source of news, because it is the most convenient place to get everything, not just news. Now, what responsibility do they have to ensure that people are consuming information that is quote unquote accurate? Well, it is a big question, because you're saying you as a public company are responsible for policing the information intake of the entire world. That's a pretty heavy lift. Now, I guess it's similar to the responsibility that companies would have to adhere to fair labor practices and safety and supply chain and things along those lines, and perhaps even more so. I think there's two points to that question. The one is, what is their responsibility? And two, how do you do it? So let's just accept the premise. Let's just, for argument's sake, say that it is Facebook's responsibility, and they should, because they are almost a public trust now at this point, that they should do something to ensure that the content that people post is factual at some level, that it's not used maliciously to misinform or mislead. Okay, that seems like a great idea. I think everybody would in a vacuum say, yeah, we should do that. But how do you do that? Who decides what is accurate? And I'm not trying to ape, I'm not trying to ape our president or his team and say there's alternative facts. I'm not trying to be coy. I'm just saying that in a as a practical matter, how do you algorithmically, which is of course the only way you could do this, how do you algorithmically determine what is okay to put on a platform and what is not? And that's the part, just from a computer science standpoint, I think is almost the biggest stumbling block, more so than the ethical responsibility.
Look, I think it's a question Mark Zuckerberg openly was trying to sidestep, as recently as 6 months ago, openly saying we're a platform, we're not a media company. I think, you've seen the latest interviews. They can't avoid at least, actively considering the issue, but absolutely, Jay, no easy answers. Same, Google is part of this debate as well. When I Google what were the causes of World War II, a Google algorithm is telling me what it believes the most accurate, truthful, relevant answer is. It's a big responsibility.
Well, and what's funny is these are the same kind of questions that were posed about Wikipedia forever. Sure. But they never really got caught up in, maybe because people don't use it, every minute of every day the way you use Facebook and Google and Twitter. But they never really got caught up in it in the same magnitude. But it's ultimately the same question, right? Which is, what is objective truth, and whose responsibility is it to make sure it's out there?
And I'm now going to shift gears and change this. I don't think it's within scope of this podcast to be able to solve that question. It's now look, it's a very, very difficult issue. It'd be interesting to see how Facebook navigate it going.
I want you to have that solved.
Yes,
okay, that's
right. Audience, I'll come back to you on that one. Look, Jay, I might move. Obviously, Facebook deservedly got a fair bit of focus in this interview. Just want to run through 3 or 4 other sort of Uber trends in the final few minutes, if I can. So we'll go a bit quicker, but maybe let's start with the MarTech community's favorite platform, but unfortunately, Joe in Idaho's not favorite platform, Twitter. Yeah. It's been a difficult 2 years. I mean, I haven't actually looked at the numbers. I suspect the users have gone completely sideways since we spoke almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty flat.
I personally still love the platform, as I know many in our industry do. But where to next from Twitter? Can it actually recover, or are we, as they would say on Wall Street, are we heading to zero?
Neither. Definitely not headed to zero. At least not anytime soon. I should say this: not headed to zero based on usage. Yes, Twitter is not growing very significantly, but it's also not losing daily active users.
True.
The challenge is that almost everything they do, Facebook can do as well or better, at least technically and operationally. And the reason that Twitter is viable today is not because of who uses, or not because of how many people uses it, but because of who uses it. It remains the darling of celebrities and athletes and journalists and the ilk. And that creates a lot of awareness. You think about how often in traditional media stories tweets are cited. It's constant. It's almost every story. How often is Facebook cited in those kind of stories? Never, because celebrities don't typically use Facebook for as their own mouthpiece. And so that's really one of the things that powers it, as well as the fact that in many ways Twitter is a newspaper. It's interesting that the data you cited, that many people use Facebook as a news source. I would argue that in a crisis, in a pinch, in a moment of global or situational or local awareness where you really need to know what's going on, more people would turn to Twitter than Facebook in those kind of situations. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence to bear that out. So I think it's still viable and vital in terms of its role in people's lives. But the real problem is the advertising revenue is actually going down in certain components of it. And that's the bigger issue. So even if you've got 150 million, 250 million, however many million it is daily active users, if you can't monetize them, you got a real problem. And right now they're still running at a loss, and they've got some money from the IPO, of course, and they still have a lot of investors, but you can't do that forever, right? You can't lose money forever without some sort of positive revenue momentum. And I think the bigger issue is that they tried every possible way to sell themselves, right? They essentially put out the for sale sign, and they talked to AT&T, and they talked to Verizon, and they talked to Microsoft, and they talked to Facebook, and they talked to Google, and they talked to Salesforce.com. And every single one of those companies said, thanks, but no thanks. Now, that might have been purchase price, but I bet it wasn't. I'll bet it was, this is a fundamentally weak company that really doesn't know how to make money and never has. Twitter has never made money a single month in the history of Twitter, ever. They've never made money over a 30-day period, a 90-day period, or a 365-day period ever in the history of the company since the day it was founded. Contrast that with Facebook, which essentially has a money printing press. And that is a big, big difference, right? And we don't talk about that enough, right? It's like we always, kind of put Twitter and Facebook in the same sentence, but financially, they shouldn't even be in the same book, much less the same sentence.
I don't know what the answer is. I still go back to the decision to IPO, and I know that horse has bolted. That if Twitter was in private hands, be they the original founders or be that private equity. Jay, I don't know about if you and I started a business and we ended up with 350 million users in 5 years' time. Is that a failure? I just think being in the public glare, the expectations of Wall Street hasn't helped.
It almost never helps.
No, and having a sort of you must be you smell a bit like a media company. You must behave like News Corp and Time Warner and go advertising only. I think that was a mistake as well, and the market is bearing that out. As you say, it's not a natural platform for traditional interruptive advertising. I don't believe, but it is an enormous, and this is utility with a U, not necessarily with a Y, as per your book. It's almost a public good. That's an infrastructure, like the telephone system.
Yes.
I would pay $10 a month to use Twitter.
Well, and I almost wonder if that's not the solution, right? Medium, the The
Yes.
blogging platform, which is actually owned by a Twitter co-founder, just announced last week that that's what they're going to go to. They're going to go to subscription based service to say, look, Medium will be the online magazine that you always wanted to pay for but didn't exist, and maybe that'll be the test case for Twitter doing the same.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see where Twitter goes from here. Let's talk. We touched on it earlier, Jay. Snapchat, the cool kid in town, the nightclub our kids are now hanging out at because you and I are in theory not there, although we're sort of desperately knocking on the windows trying to get in. I'm
doing the best they can. Yep.
Yeah, I'm puzzled as a user by Snapchat, but I've tried it and I'm not the target audience. But look, some really interesting things happening at Snapchat with the Discover platform, we had the stories, but the thing that really piqued my interest, that in the IPO, obviously it's now Snap Inc., not Snapchat, and they are listed as a camera company.
Yep.
You know, am I overreading, the implication of that, or are they looking at a complete pivot and going to AR, VR, and who knows what?
Well, they've always said that their real competitive advantage is that they have a better camera, right? They have a better camera on the phone, and now with Spectacles, the picture taking glasses, they allegedly have a better camera in the real world. I've played with them a little bit. It's interesting. I don't know that it's a game changer necessarily. They just announced yesterday that those are now available via e-commerce. Whereas previously you had to hunt them down in kind of a scavenger hunt circumstance. So now everybody can get them if you choose to purchase a pair of Spectacles. It is a very interesting company because on one hand, it's a platform. On the other hand, it's a hardware company. And on the other hand, it's a messaging company. One of the things that we don't talk about enough is Snapchat's role in messaging for many, many, many millions and millions and millions of people. Snapchat is their email. It is their texting. It is their WhatsApp. It is their WeChat. It is their Facebook Messenger. It is how they communicate to people they know, period, full stop. And when you can be the thing that people use to communicate amongst each other, and you can be that thing every day, you got a real business there. Now, how much of a business, we don't know yet, but that is a real business. I think one of the challenges that they have is that they are many different things, and that's symptomatic of a immature, relatively new company. But I got to tell you, would you rather be a company that is a bunch of different things, like Snapchat is, or a company that is one thing over and over, like Twitter? Because that's really what it comes down to, right? People say, who talked about the IPO, that, well, is Snapchat going to end up being a big success like Facebook, or really not a huge financial success like Twitter? And I think the answer is somewhere in between. That as it's currently constituted, Snapchat will continue to have a very, very loyal audience. For people who like that platform, they love the platform. There is no casual Snapchat user. There's almost no such thing, and the numbers bear that out. People either say it's their favorite social network amongst all social networks, including Facebook, or they're just not into it, right? There is nobody who says, yeah, it's not. Like LinkedIn is the exact opposite, right? LinkedIn is the platform where everybody dips in. You have some power users, right? You have a lot of power users, but then everybody else is like, yeah, I check it. I get in there once a week and see what's up. There is no such person on Snapchat. You're either in it all day or you're never in it. And that is a very interesting dynamic that I think will allow them to succeed at some level for a while. It's just, do I think they'll be able to jump the third rail and become embedded into our lives the way that Twitter is, and maybe to some degree Facebook is, or the converse? I don't know. We'll see. It's awfully hard to use. I mean, we talked about my mom not wanting to make a video. I don't see my mom mastering the Snapchat interface anytime soon. Hell, the interface is hard for me to use, and I do this for a living.
No, same. Look, Snapchat, clearly, it's got options. It can pivot. It can move in different directions. If you just, Jay, focus on Snapchat as we know it today, call it a messaging platform or a social network. I'm seeing, and I read some quite damning stats recently, Instagram stories is starting to really cut deep in terms of users and engagement. Are you kind of, again, in your experience, is that panning out for you as well? Yes,
absolutely. I use Snapchat quite a bit, and then I started to use Instagram stories more so for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's easier to use just from a pressing buttons perspective. And then two, I was already using Instagram the same way that other people are already using Instagram, the same way that Facebook is starting to put the squeeze on a lot of other things, maybe LinkedIn as well. Like if you're a creature of habit, you're going to try and expand your behaviors on a platform you're already visiting every day, as opposed to having to visit yet another platform. And so unless you're all in on Snapchat, as many people are, the casual users are going to use Instagram stories because they're already using Instagram.
Yeah. Look, interesting time to IPO. Lots of, and I think I saw, Jay, even WhatsApp or Messenger or both on Facebook, again, imitating significant features that Snapchat possesses. I've got to tell you, the IP lawyers must be having they must be having a field day. Maybe you can't patent the features Snapchat's got, but if imitation is flattery, there's lots of Snapchat imitations, appearing in various other platforms.
Oh, no question. And you do wonder at some point, what is the IP rule there, and are there patents in place? I'm not certain on that. I'm not a patent attorney, but the other question is, well, even if there are, by the time it's actually litigated to conclusion, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Like right now, just this week, they're talking about some sort of case. It was Google versus Apple or one of those kind of things. And it just went through the second round of appeals or something like that. And this case has been going on for like 10 or 11 years.
The horse is bolted.
So I was like, well, okay, maybe at some point we're going to have to pay you $1 billion in damages. But we've had 11 plus years of transgressing on your patent in the interim. So, what's the price we're willing to pay?
Yeah, it's kind of like, again, even though we're in the industry, the Apple v Samsung 9-year saga that I just kind of lost track of, and no one really cared by the time it finally was ruled on. Jay, final couple of questions. I do want to be respectful of your time, so we'll go sort of semi-quick fire now. Podcasting as a sector, obviously I'm massively bullish, both as a publisher and consumer of podcasts. To me, it's absolutely my number one way of consuming content. I know you work closely with Tom Webster and Edison Research. Is my sense sort of it podcasting had a good spurt in, say, the last couple of years, and maybe is it, I don't know, has it reached its level? Is it plateauing, or do you still see, major future growth on the consumer side of podcasting?
Major growth. In fact, Tom's going to come out with some new stats to prove that here pretty soon. Continued expansion in podcast consumption. I see no slowdown in that trend. What needs to happen for the next kind of big jump for podcasting is more embedding of podcasts into existing appliances. So in my car now, I can dial up podcasts directly. You'll start to see more people using Amazon Alexa, Google Play, Home, those kind of devices to access podcasts as well. Because again, going back to my mom would love to listen to podcasts, but she's not going to go download a podcast app and then search for them and hunt around in the iTunes store, which is crap. It's just, just the process necessary to go get a podcast right now is still way too hard for the mass audiences. So solving that problem will be the next big move that powers it. But I see no slowdown in podcast consumption as a content archetype.
Great. And in terms of your own, convince and convert empire, you're still sort of going all in on podcasts? You're seeing good growth in that space?
We are. We've terrific growth in audience. We've seen some change in sponsors and what SaaS companies want, and that's a different topic for a different day. But whereas most of our sponsors have in the past wanted more brand awareness, which podcasting is great at, now we find that many of our sponsors who are marketing technology companies really are focused almost entirely on leads. And podcasting is not particularly good at direct lead generation. It's viable, but it's not its best and highest use. So we have had some sponsors move out of podcasts and onto other media properties that we own and control, because some of the other things we do, like webinars, for example, are much closer to lead gen than podcasting, which typically works more top of the funnel.
Great. Last question, Jay. Messaging sector. We talked about it 2 years ago. You made some great points in that original podcast about how we sort of lump in social media with messaging platforms in the same kind of sector, but you see very distinct use cases. Have you seen that sort of divergence continue? Do you feel like, the WhatsApps, the Facebook messengers, very, very different sort of use cases from the more traditional social networks?
Today, yes. But we'll see. I mean, Facebook is obviously with Messenger, at least on the desktop, has that integrated a fair bit. Of course, in mobile, they make you use a different app for messages versus Facebook native, and I find that to be interesting as a strategic decision. What I think is going to happen is that they're going to add more social network features, social platform features to the messaging apps. And so a lot of the things that you do today on Twitter, that you do today on Facebook, that you even do today on Instagram will be available in the messaging apps. And then the question becomes, well, then what you really have maybe is Google Wave, right? What you essentially then have is messaging, i.e. newfangled email with a social overlay, which is what Google predicted many, many years ago, but couldn't execute on. It's just that Facebook and others are coming at it from the opposite direction. So I think we're going to see a real convergence here of messaging apps, social media, and frankly, email, as this all ends up, becoming one thing at some point. I think that's where we're headed.
That sounds good for Slack.
Yeah, no doubt. It really does. And also you have to think about wearables too. I mean, you think about podcasting and messaging and voice activation. I'm very, very bullish on voice right now across the board as the input device of the future. I think what Apple's doing right now with their AirPods, wireless headphones, is very early days, of course, in that game. But eventually, I think audio is going to be a major part of our lives in a way that it's simply not today. And while there's certainly a lot of people talking about AR and VR and all that from a visual perspective, and I don't discount it, I feel like augmented reality on the audio side is actually the trend to pay attention to first.
Look, fantastic final thought, Jay. I will wrap up the interview looking at the time. So thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's been absolutely fantastic to, as we said at the outset, sort of meander through various Uber trends. So much we could talk about further, but that's been a good sort of oversight of the landscape today. So Jay, before I let you go, sort of a year plus on from Hug Your Haters, have you got your another book cooking, or what's your plans for the near future? I don't have one
cooking just yet. We're letting Hug Your Haters and the whole social media customer service trend play out for a while, doing a lot of consulting now on that topic and have a lot of great relationships and doing some really fun stuff in that category, as well as the social media and content marketing stuff as well. So nothing cooking right now on the book side. Working on a lot of courses this year. So you'll see a social media strategy course from me, a content marketing strategy course, a influencer marketing strategy course. So working on a bunch of courses this year, which we're excited about. And other than that, more of the same.
Great stuff. So Jay, before I let you go, where do you want to send people that may want to learn a bit more about what you're up to online?
Yeah, best place to find me and all the work that we do is at convinceandconvert.com. Our award-winning blog is there, at a podcast network, as we mentioned earlier, and a bunch of other great stuff.
Jay, thank you so much for coming back for this episode number 100. Can I pre-book you now for episode 200?
Absolutely. Let's just put on the calendar. So that's going to be maybe late January of 2019, something like that.
Lock it in. Thanks so much, Jay.
Sounds good. Thanks, bud. See you later.
There we go, ladies and gents. The one and only Jay Baer back on the EchoJunction podcast. Absolutely fantastic to have Jay back on. Thank him very much for his time, and as ever, so many nuggets of wisdom and insight from Jay on the social media and the broader marketing landscape. So hope you enjoyed the conversation. Episode 100 in the can. Thanks again so much for your ongoing support of this podcast. Next target, 200. Let's see how we go, but absolutely committed to continue to bring you this podcast and more great guests coming your way from the global industry. please check out echojunction.com.au if you want to understand a bit more about what we are up to here in Australia. Thanks once again, and I look forward to seeing you on a future podcast episode.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe on iTunes, where you can also leave a review. Be social, and we'll see you again next week.